2020, in many ways, is a year of profound shift for us all. The acceleration of certain futures predicted for the next 10 years is taking place right now in front of us. It was anticipated for a long time that all sorts of arts and culture would shift towards the digital form. In this PHI Perspectives, we try to answer a simple but essential question. What do we do with all of our content? Jonas Mekas, legendary Lithuanian-American filmmaker and the godfather of the American avant-garde cinema, urges us to understand the medium before everything else.
Technology, it's out of my control. Same as cinema came in. I did not invent it. I just was born into it. And then the corporations, businessmen around the table with pencils and smoking decided that we could make more money with video. What is this film business? And they decided to switch to phase out film and go into video. So the term, and I'm the victim. You know, my film stocks disappeared suddenly. I have to relearn cinema by using different stocks. So I said, may as well. I try to see what I can do with video. But we have to do everything to preserve film as is and see film only as film and video to see video only as video. It's stupid to try to transfer it to film and destroy it, to destroy its very essence. It's like trying to transfer watercolors to oils or some crazy thing like that. That's stupid and absurd.
MIT professor William Uricchio asks the question of what to save and for whom. With the exponential creation and consumption of culture on the internet, Uricchio says that we have to learn to forget because we can't keep it all.
What to save and for whom? Crucial questions. And the what to save part is very complicated in the case of interactive documentaries. Digital culture in general. If you think about, right now we're above the 400 hours per minute of video uploaded to YouTube. That's like 67 years worth of video being uploaded per day. All of us are coming from a world of books and films and DVDs. That's in all of our background in this room, and maybe even for the people watching. And that means we're used to finitude. We're used to limits. We're used to a finite amount of material. There are only so many books, and it behooves us to try to keep them. But this level of productivity is unkeepable. It requires a new way of thinking, and we have to learn to forget. We have to learn to let go. So I'm not standing here saying the inherited notion we have from the advent of the book in the 15th century until now is something we have to stick with. We can't keep everything. We've got to be strategic about what we keep and what we don't keep. We have to be very creative about how to keep. But we can't keep it all, that's for sure. And so that's a problem. That's a paradigm shift that we have to reconcile ourselves with. Our inclination will be, and you'll hear this today, and I think it's right, the inclination is to save the best. To save the things that we do this with our DocuBase at MIT. We save projects that have been in competition, that have won awards, that have been noticed in some way or other. And that's crucially important. But as a historian, I can tell you, historians are a perverse lot. They always want what's not there. It's great to go back and see the history of Academy Award winners, but almost every film historian I know is actually interested in the other stuff. The stuff that no one except Rick Prelinger bothered to keep. And we'll hear from him later today. So we have to find a way to keep both what our culture thinks is important, but also those things that could be important for a future, that we don't see the importance of yet. Those hidden gems, those hidden insights that otherwise will be forgotten.
How do we keep important work accessible? Brett Gaylor, Canadian filmmaker, talks about the difficulties he faced to keep alive an interactive web platform for the marginalized and disenfranchised.
And so one of our challenges on a site like this was just hosting the videos. Particularly in the early 2000s, it was so expensive to do this. And for us, just as a very small team that was building the site itself, and keeping track of all the formats and compression was way too much for our outreach teams to tackle. Particularly in 2003, 2004, video was actually kind of rare to be able to find on the web. And so I was involved with a community of very early video bloggers, as we called ourselves, and many of us gravitated to an early startup called Blip TV. And they were a nice, scrappy startup. We could talk to them, we knew them, and because they were inspired by what we were doing, they made an offer to us that we could have access to their professional services for free and use their API, which is an application programming interface, to have Homeless Nation automatically upload to their servers to host the video. Awesome. We could get back to doing our work. So years passed, Homeless Nation changed a lot of people's lives, and a lot of sort of moving stories like you just saw were told. And we peaked at about 5,000 registered users. And then this happened. The world changed. Part of the Homeless Nation project was bringing the internet into places like homeless shelters and squats. And when smartphones and Wi-Fi became really ubiquitous, suddenly the connectivity issues, at least in North America where we were working, were less about the scarcity of the connectivity and the hardware. And of course, when Facebook became mainstream, that really made social networking accessible to everyone. Some of you may remember that moment when suddenly everyone you knew was on Facebook. Well, that happened with homeless people too. So it turned out that our project was actually hyper relevant in the early 2000s and became less urgent as time went on. And in retrospect, this could have been a moment for us to think about whether the project was done. But we were busy, we were cash-strapped, kind of hustling doc filmmakers. And what we did instead was raise kids, get jobs, teach at universities, and make more documentaries. And the site continued, basically without our help, that community continued. Meanwhile, in some inbox that none of us actually were checking, we got these emails announcing that blip.tv had been sold. And they gave us a couple of months to get our videos off of the site, after which time everything would be deleted. But none of us actually knew this was happening. It was being sold to Maker Studios, which are the force behind YouTube celebrities like this guy, PewDiePie, who has 50 million subscribers to his weird show about video games. Kevin probably knows exactly who this person is. And so one day we started getting messages in the inboxes that we did check, that none of the videos could be found. They had disappeared. It was a pretty sick feeling in your stomach to get those emails. Not only something that you'd worked on for years, but more importantly, it was those voices that you saw earlier. Those voices just felt lost forever. And a lot of those people were no longer around. And as documentarians, it was crushing that these life stories had simply vanished. Now, luckily, I had a friend who worked at the Internet Archive, and I'd heard that they had some employees there who had created their own kind of activist archival team, and they call themselves rogue archivists, and they help rescue user data when websites go belly up. They kind of go in there and they suck up all the data. And it turns out that before Blip TV deleted their data, this team had downloaded all of the video files they could find before the plug was pulled. And after some back and forth, we're able to create a website for us, an archive of our archive where all these voices can be found today. And I do believe that they'll be there forever because the archive is an institution and a really important one. And that's why my first lesson is to give to them annually during their fundraising campaign. The second lesson I learned is really to partner wisely. While free was music to our ears, it wasn't smart to trust Blip TV with such an essential part of our project. This was a startup whose primary goal was to be sold. Right? So we should have investigated that and had a plan B in place. And finally, I've learned that as important as the plan to raise the money and make the thing is, the next most important producing question is to how to properly end of life this work. And so I was really happy to hear William's suggestion that when these things are being funded, what would it look like to have a little bit of money set aside for that? Just a quick coda on that story. A year after they deleted all of our videos, Maker Studios was bought by the Walt Disney Corporation, who laid off 80 people. So big double birds to Maker Studios, wherever you are.
All media art is glitch art. Obsolescence and extinction is the default digital condition. Rick Prellinger, archivist and professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz, exposes the innate reality of digital artifacts, which is its state of ephemerality.
In the city where I live, San Francisco, artists are deeply fascinated with glitch, with breaks in the transmission chain, with flawed renderings, with mutilated picture and distorted sound, with ghosts in the machine. Make it look ugly. Glitch replays a 20th century litany. Mimesis is futile. Beauty resides in its own destruction. Violence is inherent in the birth and in the movement of images. But to me, glitch art fails to get one thing about itself, that all media art is glitch art. It doesn't last. Obsolescence and extinction are the default digital conditions, to paraphrase something Howard Besser said long, long time ago. Preservation is the greatest aberration. Preservation is the greatest glitch of all. Works are enclosed by their ephemerality. And digitality is funny. Somebody pranked this at Internet Archive. I didn't do this. Digitality is funny because while it introduces many new affordances, it shares many characteristics with older media forms. And one of the most striking characteristics of moving image works, both old and new, is that most of them, except for the few that are in long-term distribution, tend to suffer from enclosure. They find their way into archives and most don't find their way out again. Archival enclosure literally means that the record is sequestered from viewing and from use. It could be enclosed by copyright, because it's unpreserved and delicate, by inaccessibility, lack of cataloging, or by archivists who are unwilling to assume even slight risks. But another kind of enclosure applies to interactive works. You can put them in solitary confinement. You can protect them from touch and use. You can keep them from interaction. This ages the works prematurely. This prevents them from adapting or being adapted to new users and uses and to new platforms and code. I don't think you can keep interactive works alive when they're sequestered in a sandbox. You do not need law, restrictions, or locks to enclose a work. You just have to make it inconvenient to touch, inconvenient to use. And that's often a characteristic of an aging interactive work. Its affordances are like temporary abilities that over time evolve into disabilities. There's different modalities of accessing different material enclosed by aging frameworks. One, of course, has been to just take a picture of it. This is what art books do. And, even if they fall short of reaching artists' intentions, they have a purpose. Google Books took pictures of millions of books. And in fact, taking pictures of objects is quite often the way that we understand digitizing today, which has evolved from slow scanning to more rapid photography to 3D scanning to LiDAR. Think of the Google Street View and the Uber car is topped with rapidly rotating panoptic eyes and now scanning non-visible spectra or looking into solid objects. We're getting better at representing a certain exactitude, and each new kind of capture convinces us that it is what digitization should be, convinces us that it is corralling in some elusive truth of objects and events. But all by itself, the moving image archival community is not going to build the tech infrastructure for digital preservation. The problems are spread across too many domains. Even the studios are trapped in imperfect solutions. Preservation is like borrowing at a variable interest rate. There's no certainty. And the technical issues won't be the hardest to solve. The cultural and curatorial issues are much harder. Because on a broader level, co-creation resists enclosure. It is by its very nature unruly. It resists being crammed into archival containers. As I'll get into shortly, it also may be sensitive. It is increasingly distributed across platforms and services. As makers, we may choose to serve our viewers by tactical collaborations with archival unfriendly services. This issue may be harder and harder to solve.
We are at the brink of capturing and recording every single human interaction. As we learn to navigate this new complex landscape of digital artifacts, we have come to terms with its overwhelming and ephemeral nature. Professor Prellinger says that what we do with cultural and curatorial issues are much more important than the act of archiving itself. Thank you for listening to this PHI Perspectives. We hope that you enjoyed this 5-part series where we revisited speeches given by thinkers and creatives from PHI's archive to understand how they see what tomorrow looks like.